Part 13. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 121. Generally speaking, as long as there is no Pokeball locked, normal Pokemon cannot be trapped, unless those are too weak or unconscious due to injuries, or they enter voluntarily. In other words, it is difficult for him to stop Scyther if he really wants to run away. To be honest, although the title of trainer sounds very glorious these days, the fact is that such glory only belongs to a few, and most of them are poor trainers, or they can't be considered trainers at all. However, the times are getting better, and ordinary people can afford the cost of 1 or 2 Pokemon. Moreover, the source of Pokemon is now clearer. They are all bred and cultivated by humans, relatively close to humans, and do not need to be tamed when they are raised. Okay, keep those for a day to see the effect, and deal with these you have played with. Today's experiment is temporarily over. Shiu gave up his position and watched Professor Oak deal with the remnants of the experiment. The focus is a white powder. Professor Oak sprinkled it into those utensils, and soon those things turned into flocks and began to settle. Then Professor Oak actually poured several cups of things together and handed them to him. Go to the backyard and dig a hole to bury these. Although they should not be corrosive now, don't spread them everywhere. Understood. Shiu held the vessel in both hands as if he was holding a bomb. He had experienced the bad taste of Professor Oak. Although it would not be dangerous, it would inevitably make a fool of himself. After the 3 were mixed together, they turned into a light yellow suspension with 3 obvious layers. The thin layer on the top looked like rust with a strange luster, while the middle layer was a light yellow liquid, and the bottom layer was the remaining flocks. Although he didn't know whether these things were polluting, Shiu still found a place far away from the water source to dig a hole and bury the things. A white lightning rushed back and forth in the backyard. When turning and turning, its movement was smooth and there seemed to be no lag. Shiu was on the side, his eyes following the light. Okay, take a break. The lightning suddenly stopped in place, and the figure of Scyther was revealed when the light faded. But it was very different from before. During this period of cultivation, Scyther's height has skyrocketed to nearly 1.8 meters, completely surpassing those ordinary Scythers. This is due to Shiu's unreserved supply of resources and strict training. Scyther has another feature that is different from before, that is, the red luster gradually appears on its body. This is a change produced during the experiment. According to Dr. Oak, it is the absorbed metal elements that are changing its body. After a lot of training, Scyther now almost perfectly masters the trick of high-speed movement, which can be used to achieve the purpose of rapid maneuvering. However, although this thing bursts only in an instant, it consumes a lot of energy, and even after training, Scyther can't use it much. We still have to continue testing today, so let's stop here for the training. Shiu helped Scyther finish the rest, let it rest, and then came to Casey on the side. After a period of time, Casey is now awake for longer and longer periods of time. He used to need 17 or 18 hours of hibernation, but now it is generally 10 hours. And his body is gradually growing like Scyther, basically shedding the size of his juvenile period and becoming a circle bigger. And Casey's temperament is becoming more and more introverted. If someone else comes, they may ignore his existence. But the tree behind him can't be hidden. It's obviously summer, but it's bare, with only a few sparse leaves left, which also look yellow, trembling slightly with the wind, as if they will fall off in the next second. Casey often meditates in this corner, which naturally affects the nearby environment. Come back first, it's time to rest. The 2 of them completed the communication in just a short moment, and Shiu took out the Pokeball and took Casey back. Even now, Shiu has no good way to suppress the rapid growth of Casey's superpowers. At the same time, the unrestricted growth is further eroding Casey's control over superpowers. Fortunately, Casey is not a weakling, and he relies on his willpower to suppress his superpowers within his control. But the disadvantage is that Casey can only spend most of his time controlling himself every day, and he can only put aside the training. Or maybe it's just training for Casey. After a simple exchange and confirming that Casey is fine, Xiu temporarily put his mind at ease. Of course, it's not just Scythe and Casey who are working hard during this period, he also spent a lot of effort on both of them. Scythe is easier to say, at least there are traces to follow, and he soon almost completely digested it and participated in the improvement experiment. But he read all the documents and research reports about the Casey family in the research institute, and couldn't find any clues. He could only help Casey solve the outside things and relieve its pressure. But there is one thing that is moving in a good direction, that is, some messy research that Xiu conducted to consume Casey's superpowers. These studies, which Dro called cult, further developed Casey's way of using superpowers. For example, he had thought of packaging memory copies, or multi-purpose applications of telepathy. After handling the matter here, Xiu took Fission Mantis to the second floor of the research institute. "Here he comes," Dro said casually without looking back. "Did I take the flying mantis there?" Xiu here bypassed that side and turned to the other side. The flying mantis was very cooperative with these inspections and was completed in a short time. "Doctor, it's done." Xiu packed up his things and walked to the other side. "The pre-experiments on the flying mantis have been completed some time ago, and after the subsequent research directions have been discussed, it is now time to start physical testing. In other words, directly increase the metal content of the flying mantis body, and then monitor the data. Now I am doing routine inspections to determine the previous effects, and to compare the later effects." "Got it." Dro, who was sitting in front of the computer, shouted casually, his eyes continuing to stare at the constantly refreshing data on the computer screen. Dro has been looking at the data of flying mantis. With the support of previous data, Dro did not wait too long to get the current specific data of flying mantis. Xiu did not take flying mantis over immediately, but ran to Dro and asked, "Is there any problem?" Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 122. "Nothing, let's move on to the next step." Dro didn't say anything, but urged Xiu to work faster. Oh, he didn't ask any more questions, and honestly took Scyther to the other side. I don't know when a separate space was vacated. There was a layer of black plastic on the ground, and on top was a simple rectangular glass tank, which looked like a few pieces of glass. Xiu fed it a few capsules, then put some things for monitoring data on it, and then added water and some fine metal powder to the tank. Soon, a tank of clean and clear water was dyed into a strange color. Brown-red, and after stirring, it would also appear glittering phosphorescence, which looked extremely weird. Xiu also noticed the look in Scyther's eyes when he looked inside, and quickly comforted him, "Don't look at it like this, the problem shouldn't be big." To be honest, Xiu also felt that his words were not convincing. "Why hasn't it started yet?" "Here we go." Xiu reached forward and probed, "The water temperature is right, go in." With Xiu's order, Scyther reluctantly went in and lay down. The strange liquid immediately surrounded it from the head down to its jaw. After feeling the situation inside, Scyther suddenly felt that it didn't seem to matter. It was warm and comfortable. "The first experiment will last for 1 hour. You are responsible for recording." Dro handed him a folder. Xiu opened the folder and found blank forms with items such as body temperature, heartbeat, and consciousness. It seemed that he had a long way to go. An hour was not long, but Xiu felt it was particularly long. One reason was that this was the first experiment that Scyther personally participated in. He was afraid that Scyther would have allergies and discomfort. Another reason was that he had to observe Scyther every 5 or 6 minutes and record the situation faithfully. Only 1 hour had passed, and Scyther had not changed at all except for being drowsy. Xiu didn't know if this was right or not. He had never seen Scyther evolve into Giant Mantis. No, he had never seen other Pokemon evolve, let alone judge the current situation. He could only find Professor Oak for this. "Doctor, I've recorded it. There is no obvious change. It's normal. This is a long-term experiment. It can't be seen in 1 or 2 days. Doctor, is 1 hour really enough? I don't think it's flavored yet." "What is flavored?" Professor Oak looked at him with a puzzled look. "It's just that when I cook, some dishes need to be marinated with seasonings 2 or 3 hours in advance so that they can be flavored." "Go away, what do you know?" Professor Oak smiled helplessly. "This is the first time to do a quantitative analysis. This hour is the unit. After the data is out, we can make adjustments based on this. There will be hours and minutes in the subsequent experiments. Don't the things in the tank also need to be adjusted?" Xiu certainly understood. He was just joking just now. "Of course. We have to adjust the ingredients in real time according to the absorption of the flying mantis. It's just that after we have the data to build a model, we can use the computer to calculate. This is also the benefit of the progress of the times. These days, the two people have been in the research institute dealing with Casey and the flying mantis. They are so busy that they even discuss this matter when they eat. After eating, they rush to continue working. The flying mantis has changed the most during this period. After continuous adjustments in the past few days, the flying mantis now takes an average of 5 hours of bathing every day. And with the continuous adjustment of the materials, the contents of the glass tank have now become a tank of black turbid liquid, but the smell is not very strong, just the rusty smell of rusted metal. To be honest, it is at least easier to accept now than before. After the experiments in the past few days, the flying mantis has long been accustomed to these things. It often lies in it for half a day without any complaints. The reason is its change. Originally, the flying mantis was emerald green with a little red blush. This red blush is not obvious at ordinary times, but it is very obvious only under the sun. But now it is different. As the experiment progresses, the red blush on Scyther's body continues to deepen. Now there is a trend that it will replace the green color. I believe that Scyther will turn completely red in a short time. This trend does not seem to be a problem to Xiu, because the giant claw mantis is red, and now it is just a precursor to evolution. Although it is said that daily inspections are essential. According to the data, Scyther's hardness has indeed increased, and the weight increase is also obvious. There are also many changes in other data. These days, Xiu's job is to record the situation of Scyther. Although this work is tedious, he did not waste this time. Xiu can't stop the training of Scyther. When there are no conditions for martial arts training, he will practice literature. His daily job is to set the alarm clock and then give Scyther a lesson. When the alarm clock rings, he will record it once. Why does he use this time to give lessons to Scyther? This involves fighting. What Xiu was instilling in it now was a set of methods of dealing with enemies that he had summarized, from attribute restraint to tactics to be applied in different situations, and then to the school he had established for it. Since Xiu had never fought many battles, these were very superficial, and most of them were very basic understandings, but human wisdom was not something that Scyther could fully grasp in a day or two. Also, during the lecture, Xiu finally understood why Professor Oak advocated actual combat so much. The more he talked, the more he felt that there were more and more different situations and more ways to deal with them. In the end, even he couldn't convince himself. There were too many opponents, and some situations really could only be known after fighting. In the end, Xiu simply didn't talk about other things, just skills and attributes. Beep, beep, beep. Xiu glanced at the time and said to Scyther, "The class ends here. Today's mission is completed. Get up first." Scyther was so happy when he heard it. At first, what Chiu said was quite interesting to it, but after talking too much, it became a little bored, because it didn't understand a lot of it, and it had to listen for several hours every day. Who could stand it? When Scyther stood up, the whole body glowed with a layer of red light. In Chiu's words, it looked like a freshly steamed prawn. But there was one place that didn't seem so coordinated. That is the sickle part. The color is not as dark as other parts, and gradually becomes lighter from the handle outwards. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 123. From here you can see the changes inside the body of the flying mantis. If a human had absorbed so much metal, he would probably have been poisoned, but nothing happened to the flying mantis. Instead, he became more and more energetic. It was just that he felt a little lethargic while taking a bath. Xiu definitely believed that it was because the water temperature was too comfortable. However, the class cannot be skipped, and the efforts must be increased next time to prevent the children from losing at the starting line. Not only he and Phaeton Mantis were busy during this period, but Dr. Oak was also busy. Compared with the two of them who followed the steps step by step, Dr. Oak had to make arrangements and designs, as well as analyze the data and improve some messy things. At this moment, he was sitting in front of the computer, but it seemed that his attention was not on the jumping data on the screen, and he seemed a little distracted. Doctor. A voice brought Dr. Omu back to reality from his thoughts. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw Xiu standing next to him. Xiu saw Dro looked at him and explained, "The work is never finished, so you need to take some proper rest. Even if you don't rest, your brain still needs to cool down." What is this? You're not trying to trick me again? Dru looked at a cup of pink drink and a small plate of biscuits in front of him. This reminded him of the biscuits from before. Haha. This is a good thing, juice and milk, and this biscuit is also made of flour. I have already eaten all of Casey's rations as snacks. Xiu put down the tray and said with a smile. Ha, you still have some conscience. Dru picked up the warm cup and took a sip. How about this? This moo milk is okay. I specially added red apple juice to cook it. The milky and fruity aromas are blended. The taste is delicate and smooth, with a little sour and sweet. Xiu pointed at the biscuits and said, because if both are sweet, they will be too greasy, so this time the biscuits are not sweet, but salty, and I added ground vanilla, which will have a refreshing herbal aroma after baking. It's okay. Dru took a sip of milk and then picked up a biscuit. Why don't you eat it? I just ate down there. Xiu watched Dru eating snacks, and a smile gradually appeared on his face. Now we have identified several condiments that people can eat. Happy. Xiu didn't do much with those things, it was just for testing, so he ate them all in a short while. Not bad. Dru put down the cup and sighed, I haven't had afternoon tea like this in more than 10 years. Doctor, don't worry, I'll do it when I have time. Xiu's first statement was that he still had a lot of materials that needed to be tested. Next time I make fire dragon biscuits, the ones that breathe fire when eaten. Next time, change something. Dru looked at Xiu's newly grown hair and said hesitantly, change to some healthier snacks. Today's mission accomplished. When the flying mantis heard this, he stood up from the tank, while Xiu used a towel to wipe off the residue on his body. The flying mantis took the opportunity to move its hands and feet, straightening the two sickles, and then put them away again, just like a person stretching his arms. After the cleaning was completed, Xiu patted flying mantis's arm and said, "Okay, you can go out and do some activities by yourself first. I still have to hand in a report." Just as Xiu finished speaking, Dru left his seat and walked towards the side. He handed a report to Xiu and looked at the flying mantis and sighed. Such a big change. Xiu took the report and took a look at it. It was the latest data analysis, the changes displayed on it, and then looked at the flying mantis carefully. He didn't pay much attention to the changes a while ago, but now that he thinks about the beginning, he has indeed changed a lot. The whole body was translucent red, as if there was a layer of oil on it, and the original chitin carapace had now turned into a set of metal armor. It's been a long time since I've conducted a physical test. Go and prepare. Dharma gave a casual instruction without taking his eyes away from the flying mantis. Xiu glanced at the newly grown sickle blade of the flying praying mantis and knew that Dro had taken a liking to it again. He could only smile helplessly and then turned around to prepare. Flying mantis has also become accustomed to this kind of test, and has no objection to it. Or maybe it just likes this feeling of violent destruction. In the open space in the backyard, Xiu and Dharma stood aside, and in front of flying mantis were the props that were prepared. Attack power test. Split these things. Dharma pointed at the things placed in front of the flying mantis, including wooden cubes, rocks, iron bars and other items. After Xiu heard this, he picked up a piece of wood as thick as an arm and threw it towards the flying mantis. After these days of sparring with Casey, flying mantis now wields his sword with an indescribable smoothness. When he raised his head, he struck the wooden side accurately. A dull sound came, and the wooden side broke in response. Not bad. Dharma picked up the cut piece of wood, pointed at the cut with his finger, then threw it away and said, "Move on to the next one." Xiu Vinyan threw a fist-sized rock out again. After completing several tests, Dharma finally understood the current changes in the flying mantis. As the test progressed, Dharma became more and more shocked. The performance of the flying mantis now far exceeded that of the original metal. The attack has indeed increased a lot, but the speed has dropped by at least 3 levels. It is not only because of the increase in weight, but also because Scyther is not used to the current body and feels very awkward. It may be a bit strange to say this, but this is the fact. The body has undergone such a big change in such a short time. Even if Xiu has made targeted training for this situation cannot be avoided. Have you done the corresponding metal element tracking? Dro read the record report of the past few days and asked Xiu. No, didn't the doctor say that he would wait for you to arrange it? Go back immediately and do this now. Dro seemed a little excited, as if he had discovered something. Yes, although he didn't know why, Xiu still took Scyther back to the laboratory. As for the experiment mentioned by Dro, it was originally intended to explore the situation of metal elements in Scyther's body, but it was temporarily shelved for some reasons. Now it was brought up again by Dro, which is obviously problematic. After the whole process, even though Scyther had long been accustomed to this feeling, it was still a little annoyed, because this time Xiu fed it something very strange. Thanks to Sui Yefei for the reward. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 124. After the experiment was completed, Xiu hurriedly arranged the scythe and asked Dro impatiently, "How is it? What did the doctor find? Maybe we can solve the mystery of the scythe's body structure." Just as the two were talking, the printer next to them suddenly made a sound of working. When Xiu looked over, a report had already come out of the printer. Xiu looked at Dro, and the doctor just moved his neck towards the printer and said, "Why are you looking at me? Why don't you go get it?" Xiu didn't say anything, walked over and picked up the report with only 3 pages, but he didn't read it, but chose to give it to Dro. Dro took it and flipped through it casually and threw it to Xiu, saying, "Sure enough, I finally know why Scythe has this reaction." Xiu flipped through it briefly and soon understood why Dro said so. In the past, I only knew that Scythe could absorb metals, but I didn't know what changes these metals had on it, and this report explained this. From the tracking of metal elements, it can be seen that the metals absorbed into the body of Scythe should be transformed into some special substances to transform itself. From the distribution, it can be seen that most of them are in the transformation of the exoskeleton, such as the shell and sickle, and there is not much in the body. It seems that it is precisely because of this peculiar structure that it can absorb so much metal without any negative reaction. In front of the workbench in the laboratory on the second floor of the institute, the table is full of various devices, and there are some instruments with flashing indicator lights. And Dr. Oak was sitting at the table, concentrating on fiddling with the things in his hands. At this time, a figure ran in hurriedly. Dr. Oak looked at the person who came. It was Xiu, but he was not as calm as before, and the expression on his face revealed his inner anxiety. As soon as Xiu came in, he shouted, "Doctor! There is a problem with Scythe, go and have a look." After saying that, he dragged Dr. Oak over there without caring about anything. "Hey! Don't be anxious, slow down." When the two of them arrived, the Scythe lying in the glass tank was still unconscious, and Casey was suspended in the air beside it. Just now, while soaking in the water, Scyther suddenly began to twitch, and then fell into a coma, and his body was hot. This temperature is very abnormal, it has exceeded too much. Xiu let go of Professor Oak, and walked up while briefly describing what happened just now. "Let me take a look first." Professor Oak followed him after hearing this. The red color on Scyther's body is now more charming, and the unique metallic luster is fully revealed on it. But now the expression on its face is painful, and from time to time you can see the ripples caused by its twitching body. Is this caused by the absorption of metal exceeding the processing capacity of Scyther's body? Xiu asked Professor Oak, who was observing Scyther. Dr. Oak did not answer immediately, but after checking it once, he said, "No, it is more like a conflict between different energies. What should we do?" "Don't worry, this is very likely a precursor to evolution." Dr. Oak seemed very calm. While comforting Xiu, he further studied Scyther. "First, take Scythe over there to prevent any accidents." He stood up and walked in that direction first. Xiu looked at Casey, then nodded. Scythe's entire body floated out of the tank under Casey's control and followed behind Professor Oak. Professor Oak hurried to the side and connected various lines to Scythe. Then he ran to the computer and kept inputting some instructions. The instruments that were originally in standby mode started working. Various functions that had not been used before were activated under the operation of Professor Oak. Only then did Xiu realize that his previous operation was too childish. Professor Oak, who was working, suddenly said, "Scythe is confused now and may be in shock. You should talk to it quickly and must not let it lose consciousness completely." "Understood." Xiu took over without hesitation, looked down at Scythe and murmured, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." But now Scythe is in a strange situation and has no reaction to Xiu's words at all. Xiu was also a decisive person. Seeing this situation, he turned his head and said to Casey without hesitation, "Come on." After saying that, he closed his eyes and stood stiffly on the edge of the platform. Casey didn't say much and just closed his eyes. The strange abilities he developed with Casey before worked. Xiu skillfully connected the thoughts transmitted, but this time was very different from the past. Hot. Xiu's first reaction was heat, and it seemed that something was about to come out of his body, but this kind of outburst was an explosion. Xiu could even foresee that when that kind of power exploded, the entire Scythe might also explode. He immediately realized why Professor Oak wanted Scythe to stay awake, and quickly concentrated on helping it control the power that was about to explode. Scythe, which was originally in a chaotic state, suddenly felt the familiar voice, and then the pressure on its body was reduced a little out of thin air, allowing it to breathe under this high pressure. Professor Oak outside looked at Xiu's red skin and the tense expression on his face. He didn't expect Xiu to be so unprepared and just go straight in. I don't know whether to say he is bold or reckless. Sometimes it is not okay if it does not happen to you. The feeling brought by telepathy is just like experiencing it in person. The pain that people can suffer has a threshold. Once this threshold is exceeded, people are likely to trigger their own protective measures. Fainting is only the mildest case. There is also the possibility of direct shock or sudden death. What's more, if Xiu is sharing the pain like now, he must remain rational and not let himself faint, and he must help Scythe control the energy that is running wild in his body. Dr. Oak outside was already shocked. He did not expect Xiu to be so cruel to himself. His whole body was tense and trembling slightly. His twitching face was no longer human-shaped, and beads of sweat were pouring out of his body. But he still had no intention of giving up. Instead, Dr. Oak felt Xiu's increasingly exaggerated momentum and forcibly curbed Scythe's out-of-control situation. There is no trick here. You can only rely on perseverance and patience to keep yourself rational. Professor Oak thought he could do it, but Xiu was just a child. Looking at Xiu, who was gradually collapsing, Professor Oak quickly said, "It's okay, stop now. It's okay, I feel, I can share this pain with it." When Xiu said this, his whole body was shaking, but he never fell down even though he was about to collapse. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 125. You are doing this for nothing. Instead, you will hurt yourself, Dr. Oak scolded. In his opinion, Xiu's behavior was irrational and even a little stupid. But Dr. Oak didn't know that Xiu couldn't retreat now. Because Scythe had almost completely lost consciousness, Xiu was basically maintaining Scythe's body. As long as he left, Scythe would completely lose consciousness, and there would only be an explosion. He had to go now, and there was no choice at all. The reason why he didn't tell Dr. Oak about this was because he was afraid that he would worry or force him to cut off the connection with Scythe. As time went by, I don't know if he got used to it or his nerves were stronger, Xiu actually felt more and more relaxed, and the impulse to explode in Scythe's body became smaller and smaller. In the end, he was even able to chat with Dr. Oak. "I feel that I have slowly controlled it." "Nonsense, otherwise why am I here?" Dr. Oak said unhappily. Xiu's behavior really made him a little angry. Xiu ignored Dr. Oak's words and talked to himself. "This is a sign of evolution. I feel something is happening inside Scyther." Xiu suddenly remembered that there is also this thing called communication evolution. In the game, if Scyther wants to evolve into Mantis, it must carry a metal membrane and then communicate. Could it be that Scyther is stuck at the evolution point because it did not communicate? Xiu couldn't help but think so, it was too suspicious. Thinking of this, Xiu quickly asked Dr. Oak, "Doctor, what else does Scyther need to evolve into Mantis?" "You mean Scyther's current situation, right?" Dr. Oak could of course hear why Xiu asked this question. Metal membrane does have materials that can help Scyther evolve, but... When Xiu heard this, he knew that trouble was coming. "But I don't recommend doing this. This is originally part of evolution. If you take shortcuts and skip it, it will be a problem for Scyther." "What is the essence of evolution?" Xiu suddenly asked. "Well, there is no statement that everyone agrees on, but in my opinion, evolution is a sublimation of the level of life." Dr. Oak paused and added, "It is a choice made by the elves to adapt to the living environment. In my opinion, evolution is more like an explosion of accumulation. Whether it is matter or energy, there is a process. Now Scyther has accumulated to a certain extent and the body has begun to change. The originally shaky Xiu began to stabilize again, and even walked 2 steps to Dr. Oak and said, "I know roughly how to do it." Dr. Oak probably guessed something, but still didn't believe it, so he asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" "I want to complete this process, this will be an opportunity." "Are you crazy? I finally got the situation under control." Dr. Oak shouted loudly, but when he met Xiu's eyes, he stopped, and finally snorted. Don't worry, doctor, I never do things I'm not sure of. Xiu forced a smile, but because the muscles on his face were not sensitive, this smile looked like crying. It's up to you. I'm not responsible for anything that happens. Dr. Oak stopped his hand when he spoke. Xiu didn't say anything more, but looked at Casey on the side. Casey also opened his eyes and looked at Xiu as if he had just woken up, but he didn't seem to understand what Xiu meant. Seeing Casey like this, Xiu could only say, "Don't worry about me, get started, there's not much time left." Hearing Xiu's words, Casey began to stretch out her little hand in the direction of Scythe, and then the whole body of Scythe was surrounded by fluorescent light and slowly floated into the air. Xiu did the same, wrapped in blue light and floated up. The only difference was that Scythe was put back into the glass tank, while Xiu was floating all the time. At first, there was no reaction, Xiu couldn't even feel the water temperature, but gradually the feeling of being suppressed began to sprout quickly, and then gradually grew, and finally became the feeling that Xiu was familiar with. Because Xiu had been prepared for this time, and he had experienced it once before, it was very simple to resist this time. But the problem is not as simple as resisting, what he wants is to transform Scythe. And as that power expanded, it soon encountered resistance from other powers in Scyther's body. The confrontation between the two made Scyther return to the situation just now. Although Professor Oak outside said that he didn't care, he still watched the two of them from the side. At this time, the thermometer on the glass tank began to rise slowly, and slowly there was a trace of water vapor floating up. Seeing this, Professor Oak quickly added a bucket of water to temporarily suppress the temperature rise, but this was only a temporary solution. Looking at Xiu's situation, it was clear that Scyther's body was definitely not simple now. Originally, Professor Oak wanted to suppress Scyther's situation first, and then study how to solve it after finding the problem, instead of being so reckless like Xiu now. In addition, Professor Oak wanted to find the changes in Scyther's evolution through this, which is one of the reasons why he didn't want Xiu to do this. But now the direction of things is completely different from what he expected. But this is the first time he has seen such a crazy trainer, or is there really something wrong with his brain? Xiu, who is controlling the power in Scyther, doesn't know what Professor Oak is thinking. He is now feeling the two different powers running around in Scyther's body. It was originally a strong confrontation, but as time goes by, it slowly becomes evenly matched. And slowly, Xiu feels that one of the powers has begun to gain the upper hand, while the other is gradually weakening in the process of consumption, and there is no longer the kind of power at the beginning. Suddenly Xiu felt like he was kicked out of the channel, and Scyther, who was lying dead in the glass tank, suddenly twitched violently, and the originally closed eyes opened, and the black pupils turned into a circle of gold with a little black. But it doesn't look awake now, more like an instinctive reaction. Dr. Oak, who was originally thinking about something, was startled by Scyther's sudden reaction and shouted loudly, "What's going on? What happened to Scyther?" And Xiu's consciousness returned to his body again. He didn't bother to answer Dr. Oak's words and struggled to shout, "Kathy, quickly control it and reconnect the telepathy." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 126. Casey, who was standing by, raised his hand and grabbed the flying mantis. The flying mantis seemed to be frozen, and it looked like Casey was really serious. A torrent of blue energy surged toward the flying mantis, and the telepathy that had been disconnected was reconnected, but now the flying mantis had completely lost consciousness, and his whole brain was in chaos. And without the authorization of flying mantis, he can't take over its body now, he can only watch. Flying mantis, wake up. Stay steady, we can win. Wake up, I have delicious food here. Are you that bad? I've been fighting for so long and it's fine. Why do you just give up? Get up and run with me right away. Don't even think about eating if you don't run 10 laps. Get up quickly, don't let them look down upon you. You will never have a chance to defend yourself once you sleep. I believe you. Get up quickly. Now Xiu could only shout to the flying mantis through telepathy, hoping that it would wake up, but even though Xiu kept aggravating his tone, it still didn't respond. These words sank into the flying mantis like a mud cow sinking into the sea. As he spoke, even Xiu himself began to waver. Maybe I shouldn't have let you participate in this experiment in the first place. I knew clearly that there was no evolutionary conditions, but I still wanted to take the risk. I was wrong. Please wake up. Dromu, who was outside, looked at Xiu curled up in the air. Although his face was expressionless, his eyelashes had already been moistened by the tears seeping out of the corners of his eyes. He doesn't look as heroic as he did just now when he was enduring pain and still talking and laughing with himself. Now he feels more like a child who has lost something very important. Seeing this, Droe actually had a very strange feeling, a sense of abruptness. Xiu had relied on his will to resist so much before. He was already very tired, and after shouting at the flying mantis for so long, the last straw finally appeared to overwhelm him. Casey is out of blue. Just now, in order to break through the instinctive resistance of the flying mantis, Casey directly output the maximum power without hesitation, and maintaining this channel for such a long time also consumes a lot of money. Xiu, who was originally floating in the air, gradually fell to the ground as Casey's superpowers weakened. At the same time, Xiu also felt the telepathy that was gradually weakening, and it wasn't long before the final link between the two was broken. Xiu opened his eyes, but his vision had long been blurred. He could only struggle and stretched out his hand in the direction of the flying mantis, but he fell down before he could raise his hand. At this time, Xiaokai realized that he was exhausted. He didn't even have the strength to raise his hands. He could only look at the glass jar and murmured, "We agreed to." He didn't know if it was an auditory hallucination or something else, but a crisp crackling sound sounded in his ears, and then there were more sounds. No, Dromu, who was standing by and stared blankly, also heard the voice, shouted and rushed over, but a figure jumped out of the glass jar and stayed in the air for a short time, with the whole body exuding a dazzling light. This is not the first time that Dromu has seen the elf evolve, but for some reason this evolution shocked him, and a strange emotion began to sprout in his heart. When the light subsided, Dromu looked at the flying mantis that landed again. No, it should be called the giant pincer mantis at this time. Dromu, who looked at the giant mantis, took 2 steps back and murmured to himself, This is impossible. It's just that Xiu can no longer see all this. He has long since fallen to the ground and lost consciousness. The giant pincer mantis stepped on the floor and made a sound of gold and iron. After taking a few steps, it seemed to have adapted to its current body, and hurriedly walked towards Xiu and Casey, who were fainted on the ground. Dro saw it like this and asked quickly, "What are you going to do? He needs treatment now." But the giant pincer mantis didn't pay attention to his intention at all, and jumped out of the window while hugging them both. Hey, Dromu quickly followed, but he could only lie on the window and watch the flying mantis go away. But looking at the speed at which flying mantis was running with 2 people just now, it's a bit abnormal, isn't it? Xiu struggled to wake up and looked up at the surroundings. He saw a familiar scene. This was inside the warehouse. As soon as he raised his head, Xiu felt a stabbing pain in his brain. He touched his head unconsciously and complained, "If you do this a few more times, you will really become mentally retarded." He didn't know how he came back, but the last scene was still imprinted in front of his eyes. The dazzling light should be the evolution of the flying praying mantis. It was precisely when he saw the evolution of the flying praying mantis that he couldn't hold on and fainted. But flying mantis should be fine now. There is a place for treatment in the laboratory, but Dr. is also there. Shiu stood up with difficulty and walked outside step by step. He remembered that Casey seemed to have collapsed at that time, and he couldn't let go of it. He had to see Casey and the flying mantis to feel at ease. Because he knew that Casey did not faint because of exhaustion of superpowers, but was caused by sharing the pain of the flying mantis with him. It was the moment before Casey fainted that it lost consciousness, but it also made Shiu, who had always been connected to it, aware of its condition. Before, he thought it was because of the flying mantis that his condition improved so quickly, but he didn't expect that it was Casey who was silently helping him share the burden. Come to think of it, I'm really useless as a trainer. Shiu leaned on the door of the warehouse, opened the door and looked out. It was already night, which meant that he had slept for at least half a day. Under the moonlight, Shiu dragged his tired body towards the research institute. It was only a little after 9 o'clock, and Dr. didn't rest so soon. He urgently needed to understand the situation at that time, as well as the situation of Casey and Scyther. Dr. Shiu weakly slapped the door of the research institute. He almost fell to the ground after a few slaps. Fortunately, he was fine after holding the wall. No, there is no reason for me to be so weak. Shiu also felt that something seemed to be wrong with his body. With his physical fitness, there was no reason for him to be like this. Here Dr. opened the door and saw him like this and complained, "What are you doing?" "Nothing, just hungry." Shiu didn't say anything, just said casually, "That's perfect, I'm having a midnight snack, come together." Dr. took a step to the side and made way for him to come in. Shiu walked in directly, closed the door, and followed Professor Oak inside, asking about Casey and Scyther. Professor Oak looked back at him, "Didn't they go back with you?" "Thanks to the Crown Moon God for the reward." Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 127. Go back with me. Yes, the flying mantis took you and Casey away after it evolved. I don't know why. Maybe it reacted a little too aggressively to the outside world when it first evolved. Xiaoya didn't know what to say, but he could only help it come back. "Well, please sit down first." Dr. said nothing more, and after leaving a word, he turned to the kitchen. "Doctor, the instant noodles you make are so delicious." Shiu was feeling quite emotional as he ate the instant noodles in the bowl. He didn't expect that one day he would be able to eat something made by Dr. Although it was instant noodles, it had a profound commemorative meaning. To be honest, Dr. is really good at making instant noodles. He has eaten instant noodles for so many years in his previous life, so he is considered an expert, but he still can't make this kind of noodles that are moderately soft and hard, have the right seasoning, and can be eaten when they are warm at the end. Instant noodles. Ashamed of myself. Maybe it's because I have never respected instant noodles. After eating a large bowl of instant noodles, Shiu finally regained some of his energy. He was no longer weak and even spoke a little louder. "You are really a lunatic." Dr. who had finished eating long ago, saw his heartless look and said angrily from the side. "Thank you, Doctor." Shiu smiled and nodded to Dr. not caring about his words at all. "Okay." Dr. waved his hand casually, but he seemed to have thought of something again, and added, "But I suggest you take a look at your giant pincer mantis first." Shiu's face that was still smiling suddenly froze. Dr. would not say this for no reason, and he did not see the last situation. He only knew that the flying mantis should have evolved, but, if something happened during the evolution process, what surprise? You must know that this evolution was almost forced by him and Dr. and no one knew what the outcome would be. Shiu took out the pokeball of giant claw mantis with his backhand and looked at it. After a while, he made up his mind and pressed the button on the elf ball. With a flash of red light, the flying mantis reappeared in front of him, but now it was no longer the familiar appearance of the flying mantis. It had completed its evolution, and its entire body had undergone tremendous changes. The giant pincer mantis is much taller than the flying mantis, and its body proportions are more like those of an ant. Its abdomen has become larger, and the shape of its thigh roots has become more rounded. Those protruding spikes have disappeared, and the carapace was not originally covered. The thighs were also covered by newly grown carapace. The originally wide solace and 3 white claws disappeared, replaced by smaller solace and 2 protruding claws, one behind the other. The 2 sickles turned into 2 pliers, and the wings on his back became shorter from the original willow leaf shape. The wing bones also became shorter, and could only cover 2/3 of the wings, and they originally overlapped. Part of the duplicated wings were separated. The protrusions on the cheeks have disappeared, and the 3 protrusions on the head have become longer. Generally speaking, the entire head is more rounded. There are fewer protrusions and spikes all over the body, but now the entire body of the giant pincer mantis is wrapped in within the carapace. The increase in defense is visible to the naked eye. There is nothing wrong with the appearance. The reason why Dr. Oak said that is because the color of the giant pincer mantis is a little wrong. The normal giant pincer mantis should be red and black, but this one is actually black and gold. The areas that were originally red were covered with black, and the black areas turned into a dark gold color. The eye pattern on the pincers turned into a gold circle wrapped with a little black, exactly the same as the current eyes of the giant pincer mantis, but enlarged a few times. Just times. Shiu looked at the giant pincer mantis and suddenly remembered that an advertisement suddenly popped up in the lower right corner while playing on the computer. Shock. My sister-in-law made a mistake and allowed the flying mantis to evolve into the dark gold mantis. That's right, that's the feeling, this is too much. But having said that, the giant pincer mantis is really handsome now. The normal red and black color scheme was already very handsome, but the current black and gold color scheme has a mysterious temperament like a night hunter. With a height of more than 2 meters, he is cold and cold. Domineering is not as simple as that. It's not bad. Isn't he quite handsome? Shiu looked at Dr. Omu and responded to his words. Dr. Oki glanced at him. Shiu's behavior just now was much more outrageous than when he first saw the giant pincer mantis. He was still pretending to be calm. Haha. It's not a big problem. Shiu said nothing more and released Casey with his backhand. Casey's situation was a little better than him, at least it didn't seem like he was losing strength, but Shiu didn't dare to relax anymore, because Casey only showed him what he wanted to see. I'll wash the bowls later. Doctor, just leave them for now. After saying that, Shiu ran up to the 2nd floor with the 2 elves. Don't worry about whether there is anything wrong, just check it out, it doesn't cost any money anyway. It's heavy again. It seems that I won't be able to hold you soon. Shiu smiled and held Casey to the position. Casey, who had been rarely speaking, suddenly said, I can bear it better than you, don't worry about me. Shiu said while adjusting the machine, okay, let's take a rest first. We'll talk about these issues later. Seeing Casey closing his eyes and curling up on the large hospital bed, Shiu felt an indescribable feeling in his heart. The flying mantis on the side also saw this scene, came over and stood next to Shiu and looked at Casey inside. Don't worry, Casey is fine. You eat something first, and I will take you to check it out later. After he arranged Casey, he hurriedly took the giant pincer mantis to check. Although it has evolved, why did it become like this? Will there be any consequences? Sometimes, cold data can calm him down. Why hasn't this been done for so long? Professor Oak went up to the 2nd floor, but only saw Shiu taking notes with a pen and paper. Casey and Scyther were not beside him, and he seemed not to notice anyone coming up. Shiu, Professor Oak shouted louder. And Chiu also woke up from that state, looked at Professor Oak who came over, and said something very strange. I know why Scyther was like this before. Professor Oak looked at Chiu who was in a somewhat abnormal state and asked, what are you talking about? Is this child sick? What kind of stimulation did he suffer? Doctor, we paid too much attention to external conditions before and may have overlooked some things. Dr. Oak knew that Chiu was not a person who liked to brag. After thinking about it, he could only sit down and look at him, saying, explain why you say that. Chiu didn't waste any words. He directly handed the small notebook in his hand to Dr. Oak, and then began to explain himself. The evolution of Scyther into giant mantis is actually through the absorption of metal elements to transform itself. With the intake of metal elements, the energy in the body of Scyther will change, and the emergence of new energy will. Thanks to Fu Feng and Zhu Moyun for the reward. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 128. Droe took the notebook and looked at the slightly scrawled writing on it. As he read on, he quickly ignored the small flaws and his attention was completely attracted by the content. For a long time, Droe just glanced at the beginning and then raised his notebook and asked Chiu, are you sure? Chiu nodded towards Dromu, and then explained. The flying mantis extracts and condenses metallic energy from the metal elements, and then acts on itself. The used and excess metal elements will be transferred to the exoskeleton such as the shell and the sickle. At this time, the outer shell and the sickle will show signs of metallization, and at the same time serve as a place for energy storage, and the inside of the flying mantis will be transformed by this energy. Dromu looked through Chiu's records and listened to his words. It took him a while to sort out the situation, and at the same time, the situations presented by the flying mantis before were explained. You mean, the real core of the evolution of the flying mantis is that energy, not the type of metal and some messy things, right? It can be understood this way, but it is similar to the results of previous tests. The condition of the metal will also affect the properties of the exoskeleton and sickle of the giant pincer mantis. But before he could finish speaking, Dromu interrupted. Yes. You kid actually discovered this. You have almost solved the problem of the evolution of flying mantises. You are almost as good as those experts who specialize in this stuff. Dromu raised his hand and handed the notebook back, and added with a smile, as soon as this paper is published, you are not allowed to be famous in the entire circle. Chiu looked at Droe's smiling face, then took the next step with a little helplessness, shook his head and said. I did not discover this alone. Without the support of Droe's previous data, there would be no such conclusion. When Dromu heard this, he thought it was Chiu being modest at first, but judging from his expression and tone, that was not what he meant. What do you mean? It's you who discovered it, so I won't steal your achievements. Doubts linger in Droe's mind. No one can avoid profit and glory. The road is clear. Obviously the most difficult beginning has been solved. All he needs to do next is to test according to his ideas. Why? Chiu smiled bitterly and said, Doctor, you know that I came here to ask for help just to solve their problems. The so-called academic results are completely meaningless to me, not to mention that the flying mantis matter was originally presided over by the doctor. I am only involved as an assistant, so how can I have the nerve to take away the fruits of the doctor's efforts? Then why are you showing this to me? Droe suddenly seemed a little irritable and shouted at Chiaju, are you giving me charity? Doctor, you misunderstood, you know I don't care about those. Then do you think I care? Dromu interrupted Chiu, and looked at him with a hint of anger. At his age, he has never seen anything happen. Logically speaking, he would not be so angry, but Chiu's behavior now really makes him feel humiliated. It doesn't matter whether Chiu did it intentionally or not. Chiu's words put him in a very embarrassing position. Doctor, I think you have misunderstood. First of all, I have no interest in these, and I am not a researcher who studies elves. What's more, this is just a conjecture, and verification will require a lot of time and energy. But the affairs of Giant Claw Mantis and Casey took up most of my time, and there was no extra time to study these things. Shiu really didn't have any malicious intentions this time, nor was he trying to plot against Dr. Oak. He just took the opportunity of the evolution of the flying praying mantis to share with Dr. Oak some of his understanding of the evolutionary process of the flying praying mantis. What's more, Shiu really learned something from this incident. The time he controlled the flying mantis body allowed him to see many things that normal people couldn't. It can almost be said that he participated in the evolution of the flying mantis. During most of the process, being kicked in the end was probably due to its own instinctive resistance. Maybe no one in this world has ever done something as crazy as him. Of course, the reward was huge. Not only did the flying mantis evolve successfully, but he also got clues to the elf's evolution. And what Jiu showed Droe just now was those things. He just wanted to get Droe's point of view to see if this was possible. He really didn't care much about other things. Droe's reaction was a bit unexpected, but it was right. People like him should really hate academic fraud. When the two of them chatted before, he probably knew that Droe was very rigorous in academics. Knowing that it was caused by his failure to explain the matter clearly, Shiu added, "What I thought was just a conjecture. It cannot be confirmed, and I have no ability to confirm it, so I gave this to the doctor. I'm just hoping to get some advice from the doctor." After Dr. heard this, he was silent for a while and then said, "I'm sorry, your idea is very good, but..." Droe also confirmed that Jiu didn't do it on purpose. Right is right and wrong is wrong. He still has the courage to apologize. That thing had a big impact on him, and the concept introduced in it was likely to cause earth-shaking changes in the entire academic world, so he lost his composure like this. Sometimes knowing less is a very happy thing. After all, the more you know, the more you don't know. It was as if Shiu, who proposed that concept, had no idea what impact his words would have on the world. "It's okay, I just thought about it casually." Shiu didn't react much. He proposed this based on his conjecture about elves in his previous life, and combined with his current experience. He gave it to Professor Oak just to ask him to help verify it. As for the benefits and reputation, he didn't care. Money is a good thing, but it's enough. It's getting late. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Dr. Oak didn't mean to continue talking. He got up and went downstairs first, and Shiu followed him down. After Shiu left the institute, Dr. Oak sat alone in the living room. There was a cup of steaming tea on the table, which was obviously freshly brewed. Dr. Oak watched the tea leaves rise and fall in the cup, but his attention was not on it, but on the conjectures that Shiu had just made. Suddenly, Dr. Oak seemed to wake up, closed his eyes and shook his head, but his frown did not relax, but deepened. Professor Oak sighed, then held the teacup in his hand and said to himself, "You really know how to give me a difficult problem?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 129. Shiu didn't care about the little things just now, he was still thinking about another more important thing in his mind. This may be related to whether Casey can control his situation. As soon as he returned to the warehouse, Shiu released Casey from the elf ball, and then hurriedly said, "Did you feel the struggle between the two energies when you were connected to the flying mantis?" Casey opened his eyes and looked at Shiu strangely, paused for a moment before nodding slightly. After receiving Casey's confirmation, Shiu calmed down and looked thoughtful. After a while, he spoke again. The problem you have now is uncontrolled growth and superpowers that cannot be controlled and escape. As he said this, Shiu looked up at Casey and said something in a questioning tone. What if we find a way to drain the superpower out of you? When Casey heard this, he understood what he meant instantly, but the operation was not that simple. He could see the state of the flying mantis before. If an accident caused the control to go out of control, the problem would be even more troublesome. Come on, come on. Let's study it. Of course Shiu knew about this problem and the seriousness of the consequences, so he didn't dare to tell Daramu, but chose to do it himself. Because he knew that if he didn't take measures, he would be dead if he continued. On the simply designated area in the backyard, the giant pincer mantis was running back and forth. However, the discomfort caused by its evolution had not gone away, causing its movements to be a bit stiff, without the smooth feeling it had before. But the pressure when running is also stronger. It looks like a running steel behemoth, with a shocking pressure. Shiu held the props and faithfully recorded all this, and from time to time he was still writing and drawing in his notebook. Droe walked slowly over from the research institute. He did not look at Shiu's records. Instead, he focused on the giant pincer mantis and asked casually. Is the test complete? That's almost it? There are still a few tests that need to be repeated. Shiu glanced at the notes in his hand and answered simply. Your inspection data from last night have also come out. There is indeed a huge gap between the giant pincer mantis before and after evolution. You have to find a way to grasp the rations and training direction yourself. I know. Shiu looked at Dromu in surprise. He didn't remind himself of this much before. But no matter what the reason, I have to express my gratitude. What would you like to have for afternoon tea, doctor? Get some milk tea chips. The two chatted for a while, and the giant pincer mantis also completed the test. Here, Dromu returned to the research institute first with the data Shiu had just recorded. Shiu, on the other hand, took the giant pincer mantis for new training. After evolution, your body has changed a lot, and your attack methods have also changed. For example, the previous scythe could chop and cut with its sharpness, but now you have pliers in your hands, which can no longer do what it did before. That's the situation, so we have to make changes to our training. While Shiu was analyzing the giant pincer mantis, he picked up the long branch placed aside and changed his words. But now your situation is not the time to think about that. Now you need to adapt to the physical changes after evolution. Saying that, Shiu mercilessly moved forward and waved the weapon in his hand towards the giant mantis. The giant pincer mantis has long been familiar with Shiu's routine, and subconsciously raised his hand to block it, but his evolved body seemed a bit uncoordinated. Even if it reacted, it was still a step slower and the body was hit. The giant pincer mantis knew very well that this was just the beginning, and quickly concentrated on adjusting its limbs for defense. Shiu also waved the weapon in his hand. Droki is busy comparing the data before and after the evolution of the giant pincer mantis, and writing experimental reports. During the day, Shiu spent most of his time helping the giant pincer mantis to adapt to his body, and at night, he secretly developed the possibility of self-limitation with Kathy. Time passes in an uncontrollable way. At night, a figure sat alone by the river, and opposite him was an even shorter figure. The two were none other than Shiu and Kathy. They sat opposite each other like this, without any conversation. Only the sound of rushing water could be heard around them. It was strangely calm. As time went by, the postures and movements of both of them did not change. Only a trace of anxiety appeared on Shiu's face, and it became more and more intense. Until at a certain moment, he suddenly opened his eyes and his whole body fell forward uncontrollably. Fortunately, he reacted and raised his hands to prop himself up, but his breathing rhythm sounded a bit chaotic. Casey, who was sitting opposite him, also slowly opened his eyes. After taking a few deep breaths, Xiu also calmed down. He raised his head and faced Casey and said, "It should be possible, but this thing is a bit difficult. You still need to practice more." After saying that, he sat up straight and closed his eyes again. When Casey looked at Xiu like this, a trace of confusion flashed across his face, but it quickly disappeared and he slowly closed his eyes. "What have you been doing these days? Why do you have dark circles under your eyes?" At the dinner table, Daramu, who had just finished eating, seemed a little comfortable and asked Xiu casually. "It's nothing, I just encountered some troubles in my studies and they are almost solved." Xiu didn't have much reaction to this and just explained briefly. Dro did not ask any further questions about his perfunctory answer, but took the initiative to change the topic. "Have you ever been to Viridian City?" Viridian City. Xiu's attention was slightly focused, and he turned his head to look at Dro. "Viridian City is going to hold an event, and the organizer invited me to go as a guest. Do you want to go with me?" "Doctor, don't you hate these messy events?" The meaning of Xiu's words was very clear. Dro, a technology geek, was unwilling to go out of Pallet Town. Moreover, he had expressed his disgust for some scholars participating in those events before, thinking that those people did not do research properly. Why is he going to be a guest today? Dro was aware of Xiu's doubts, and could only say with a little helplessness, "The organizer of the event is the Alliance, and the person who invited me is Joey from Viridian City. How can I refuse?" Hearing the word Alliance, Xiu could only laugh along, and did not dwell on Dro's choice, but turned the topic to the event itself. "What kind of activity is this?" I don't know, but it should be the same old thing, a battle, or something." Professor Oak looked a little casual, obviously not taking this matter too seriously. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 130. It's just that Xiu was a little speechless when he heard this. He didn't even know what the activity was. This was a bit too much. Droki also noticed Xiu's doubts and added, "I am not a judge. I only show my face as a special guest at the opening and award ceremony. As for the activities, it has nothing to do with me." As Daramu spoke, he looked like he was remembering, and after a slight pause, he spoke again. "According to the past situation, it's nothing more than some competitions, in which we find a few popular trainers to come over and create some hype, then play a few battles, and then it's over and we go home." When Xiu heard this, he felt that what Dromu cared about most was going home. "Then what will happen to the elves in the institute after we leave?" Xiu is also a little curious about this event. After all, apart from battles, this world also has many weird competitions and celebrations. Of course, I am more curious about Jaban City. Just like he said, what will happen to the elves in the backyard once they leave? It's simple. Just tell Hanako and ask her to come over and help feed her when she has time. Xiu suddenly trembled when he heard this name, and some vague memories emerged in his mind because of this name. Xiu's strange reaction naturally attracted Dro's attention. "What are you doing?" "No, I'm just curious about who this Hanako is. After all, I have never heard of this person from the doctor, but you should be familiar with it from what the doctor said, right? Hanako has been coming to the institute to play with the elves since she was a child, and she is more familiar with the backyard than you." Droki seemed very casual and explained briefly, and then asked, "Then do you want to go? Are the expenses reimbursed?" "We are guests, there must be arrangements over there." "Go." There are some publicly funded tours, so Xiu has to go and see them no matter what, since it doesn't cost any money anyway. "And I have indeed stayed in the research institute for too long and need to go out for some activities." "Then you pack up and leave tomorrow." "Tomorrow is so soon." Xiu looked at Dromu in surprise. "Otherwise, no matter how long you want to wait, I'll think he's too slow. Shiu was choked by Daramu, and there was a hint of embarrassment on his face, but he still agreed. The conversation here ended, and the two went about their own business. Shiu was ready early the next morning, and he and Daramu were walking on the road to Jingxin town. That side of town is my family's house, but usually I'm not there. Droki brought Shiu to a corner of the town, quite a distance from the center, with a few houses located in it. That's Hanako's house. Over there is her flower field. Droe raised his hand and pointed to a house. Shiu followed Droe's instructions and saw an exquisite two-story building surrounded by blooming flowers and plants. Just when Shiu was stunned, Daramu walked over there, and he had to react and follow in a hurry. As soon as I got closer, I saw a woman in casual clothes surrounded by various flowers and plants. She was holding a water pipe in her hand. A trickle of water flowed out of the pipe and sprayed on the delicate flowers. By the time Shiu rushed over, the two of them were already chatting. "You are the new assistant from the institute, right?" Hanako nodded slightly towards Shiu, with a smile on his face. Facing such a legendary figure, Shiu was stunned for a moment before he came to his senses and nodded in response, not forgetting to say hello. "Hello, Aunt Hanako. You are such a good boy." Shiu didn't know what to say, he just stood beside Daramu obediently and listened to the conversation between them. The relationship between the two revealed in the words seems to be very good, at least quite familiar, but the feeling is more like that of an elder to a younger generation. "Leave it to me, you guys have fun." Hanako agreed after listening to Droe's request. "Where's Zayazai? You haven't gotten up yet?" Dro glanced into the room and asked casually. Hanako smiled helplessly, nodded and said, "Well, I guess I stayed up late watching TV last night." "This kid." The two chatted about their daily life and then separated. Daramu took Shiu to another house not far away. "This is my home. I won't go in until it's been cleaned. Just go to the garage." After Droki gave a brief explanation, he moved to the other side of the house. Shiu could only take a quick glance at the house full of history and quickly follow him. A separate garage is located at the right rear of the house. At this time, the rolling shutter door of the garage has been raised by Dromu, revealing a pickup truck inside. "Stop looking, get in the car, we're ready to go." Droki shouted and got into the driver's seat. Shiu had no choice but to get in the car quickly, not forgetting to complain. "Why are you in such a hurry, doctor? You'd better hurry if you want to get to lunch on time." While the nonsense was being repaired, the car had already been driven out of the garage. Zayagong wanted to remind Daramu that the garage door had not been closed, but at this time the door automatically fell and made a mechanical transmission sound. The car had already jumped out of the road and headed towards the back of the town. "How long will it take to get to Jobin City?" Shiu looked out the car window at the fast-moving scene, feeling curious for a moment. 3 to 4 hours. If there are no accidents on the way, it may take longer if the road is damaged by elves or there are some random troubles. Droe's tone was casual, and he obviously thought this was normal. But for Shiu, there was a bit of a sense of surprise that he couldn't cope with it. His understanding of the journey in this world is actually somewhat vague, and all this conflicts with the impressions in his memory. If calculated based on the current traffic speed, the distance between the two places would be almost 200 kilometers. This rough estimate of the area of Kanto is a bit exaggerated. It is not an environment that can be crossed by just walking in a few days, let alone there are many roads on the road. All kinds of messy things. Dromu fell into silence after seeing Shiu get into the car. He was a little strange and couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong?" "I've never been out of a big city, so I'm a little nervous." It was impossible for Shiu to discuss that with Dromu, so he could only make a perfunctory statement. On the contrary, Droki smiled after listening to his words and said, "Anyway, there will be nothing to do after the opening. I will take you around Viridian City. You should also take this opportunity to have a rest. Don't be so tired all day long. Xiu suddenly reacted when he heard this. No wonder Daramu wanted to take him out. It turned out that he was in a bad state during this period and wanted him to play and relax.